Hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of Your Arlington Dollar. We are joined here in the studio again by Dean Carman and Annie LaCourt. Dean, as you'll remember, is a Finance Committee member, and Annie is a former Board of Selectmen. More importantly for our today's discussion, both are town meeting members. So welcome back, and thanks for being here, guys. We do want to spend the balance of today's conversation, I think, talking about what happened at last night's special town meeting. Yep. 3 topics were up for discussion, and I'll let you guys introduce our audiences and walk us through what happened last night. But I know that I can tell from conversations before we went on air that you guys are fairly jazzed about the outcomes last night. So Annie, why don't you get us started?
Sure. So this was one of the best town meetings I've ever attended. It was very efficient, and the discussions were very thoughtful and factual, and the decisions were made by overwhelming majorities in town meeting. It was really a moment to be proud of for the form of government that Arlington has. We had a warrant of 6 or 7 articles that we had to vote, most of them related to issues with the schools, some with school space, and 1 article relating to the Minuteman. A couple of those articles we put on hold and voted no action on, but most of them were, pretty weighty issues that will affect our future, that we needed to make decisions about. I could speak to the Stratton articles, and then I think Dean may want to talk a little bit about Minuteman. So we had 2 articles before us relating to rebuilding the Stratton School, and this was really important. This is the last of the 7 elementary schools that in the late 90s and in 2000 we promised the town we would rebuild or renovate. It's been a long struggle to get to the point where we had a plan for how we were going to provide equity at Stratton in terms of a renovation. And we had 2 articles before us last night to do that. One to pay for modular classroom space so that the students at Stratton would have some place to go to school while we renovate the rest of their building. And the other was to vote the capital funding to renovate the rest of their building. On the vote to appropriate the capital funds to renovate the building, we were able to assume some of those dollars would come out of the original debt exclusion, which means that we can add them to the tax roll over and above our normal sort of levy limit. And there's a mechanism for using an inflation factor, which is really why we were able to take a substantial amount of money from that, something in the neighborhood of $5 million on the old debt exclusion.
Let me interject for a second here just to clarify something. Yep. So when you say the original debt exclusion, are you talking about back in the 1990s when?
We voted a debt exclusion in 2000 to renovate 4 elementary schools, the last of the 7 that we had voted in 1998.
So a previous one had covered the first 3 and then, okay.
Yeah. Now we were able to put together a plan for the Stratton, and it was a great community engagement process. The parents were involved in deciding what was the priorities for renovation of the building. We're not knocking the whole building down, but we're making, major renovations to the interior. We were able to use those parent priorities to do the architectural program. We're going to get a new library in what had been an unused gym space. We're going to get, major improvements to classrooms and to the cafetorium and the gym, rearrangement of the administrative space, expansion of the nurses' station, new conference room. It's really exciting.
Sounds like a wish list, just about.
But it's being done for a reasonable amount of money for compared to the other school projects that we did. It's totally in line. The parents are excited about it, which is really what you want, for them to be excited about what is not a knockdown and rebuild like a lot of the other schools. And I introduced the president of the PTO from Stratton, who is someone to keep an eye on, Jane Morgan. Really dynamic, really interesting person. And she confirmed that the community is very excited about this, are not concerned about their children being in modulars for a school year, knowing the reward at the other end, which is a rearranged school building that will be more functional and with fit and finish that will match the rest of our elementary schools. It was
Great.
really exciting.
In addition to Stratton, there were a couple of other things on the table. I know you're going to talk about Minuteman, Dean, but let me ask you first, what's the third of the things that was decided yesterday?
The third of the things that started yesterday was the 2 modular additions, excuse me, at Thompson School. So as we had talked about in our last Your Arlington Dollar segment, the Thompson School is over capacity right now due to...
Even though, we'll just remind our viewers that
it was
this
rebuilt.
is the most recent
Yep.
rebuild.
Yep, it has experienced rapid enrollment growth over the last 5 years, which exceeded anybody's expectations, puts the school in a position where they're at what I like to refer to as -1 classroom, so they need 1 more classroom than the current year than they have. And so something had to be done because as you know, the 2 classrooms of 5th graders leave, we're expecting 4 classrooms of kindergartners to arrive next year. So we're going to go into a larger deficit if we do nothing. And so what adding 2 modulars will do next year is it will allow the sections to remain at a reasonable class size. Without taking any action last night, if town meeting rejected that, we would have started to see, in addition, the current 5th grade at Thompson is in a very unfortunate situation, which I think I'm pretty embarrassed about, frankly, which is they have 30 kids in a class. I think one classroom's 30, the other one's 29. If we had done nothing last night, we would have seen that pattern of 30 kids in a class at Thompson be even worse next year. So this is hopefully, through a series of measures, going to bring class sizes down for 1 year at Thompson. Does not fix the problem long term.
If you have something more to say on Thompson, Dean, that's fine. Otherwise, I would invite you to bring us up to date on what's going on with
Minuteman. Man, it wouldn't make good TV for me to throw both my hands over the ear and celebrate, but it's really what I want to do.
Great TV, go ahead.
It's really what I want to do. Minuteman, as a lot of people know, and some people will be hearing, has been a long challenge and struggle for the town of Arlington. It is a great school. I get up on the floor of town meeting every year and talk about how it's a great school. But structurally, the way the regional agreement works, the way the funding works, just the mechanics of the school, it just was on a bad footing. And 10 years ago, my then finance committee colleague, or actually a year before I got on the finance committee, my colleague Dan Dunn, really championed the finance committee's dissent about the governance structure of Minuteman, where we sent 1/3 of the kids, paid 1/3 of the bills, but got 1/16 of the vote. Where a school that was built for 1,100 kids only had 700 kids in it and had very unstable enrollment. Where programs that really need to be discontinued were not discontinued because the management of the school just didn't have the courage to make tough decisions. So we had championed that 10 years ago and had no leverage. In 2010, we got leverage because they wanted to build a new building. And under the operating budget, where they only need 10 of 16 communities to get it passed, so they can get essentially 30%, 35% of the members to pass a budget, they needed a unanimous vote. They needed Arlington to sign on to this. And so we have been working steadily and consistently for changes in the district. We were very fortunate that they changed leadership in the school around that time to Dr. Ed Buquillan, who has been fantastic. He helped lower the per pupil cost at Minuteman. He stabilized enrollment. He did a lot of great things to position us. And then on the finance committee, in order, we sent our chair, Al Tosti, there to work on the regional agreement. He worked on it for a couple of years. He then handed it off to Charlie Foskett, who's the chair of the capital planning committee, who continued to work on the regional agreement. We put the regional agreement before town meeting in 2014. Our town meeting passed it. It had to go, it went for every town, all the 16 members. I think 10 of them, 11 of them passed it, 5 of them voted against it. We then, within the last year, sent now selectman Dan Dunn. I mean, it just came right back full cycle, up there to cut a deal, right? And Dan did, yeoman's work is an understatement. I mean, his job to go up there, what he was sent up there to do was to get the dissenting communities to express what they needed in the regional agreement for changes to approve it, while holding on to the 10 that had already voted on it. And Dan spent an enormous amount of time on an issue which he led the fight on and started getting the town engaged in, that we really, really needed to reform that school. And so last night, we believe, or a month ago, Dan believes he has the votes in all 16 schools. We put that new regional agreement before town meeting last night, who had heard from me and from Dan the exact, for the same speech for, I think, somewhere between for the 10th time, I think, when we talked about the exact same thing. They were very well informed on the issue, and they overwhelmingly supported a change to the regional agreement, which we're hoping will pass all 16 communities by March 1st. and then we will move to the next phase, which is building a school.
That sounds like great news. And again, I would invite you to go ahead and jump up and down in the air anytime you feel like it. But what I noticed is missing from the answer is any discussion of the money that's going to be involved, either for Arlington or in general. Is that an issue, a topic that has been deferred? Not directly addressed last night, is that right? Or
The regional agreement that Dean is talking about gives us leverage in a couple of areas. So one thing is that it creates a path for a town to withdraw from the Minuteman agreement that doesn't require the vote of all 16 towns, positive vote to let you go, essentially. It gives us weighted voting on the school committee so that Arlington will now have a percentage of the decision-making power that represents the number of students in the school, okay? And it changes the formula by which capital costs will be distributed, and those changes are in our favor and include distributing some of those capital costs to tuitions for non-member students from non-member communities. So we have a couple of things that come out of that are good for us. One is that if we don't like the deal on the build of the new school, or we decide that we don't want to make that investment, we have a path for withdrawing. I do think that we will decide we want to make that investment, but we also will be paying a smaller share, and the share of the investment will be distributed more fairly and will include the folks who are sending their kids whose communities are not members. So the other thing this regional agreement does is it makes joining the Minuteman agreement and becoming a member school more attractive to communities like Waltham and Watertown, who are probably more aligned with, the goals of the school than some of the member communities that we have.
And one of the things we did in that vote, it's an underlying thing, and as a finance committee member, I think I have no problem saying this, which is if the new regional agreement passes, it makes non-membership very uncomfortable for Waltham and Watertown. And the way we did that was we send 450 member children to the school, and the non-member children are about 300. So if you assume the school has a historic enrollment of 750 students, that's the split. The new school is 625 students, and there's always a preference for member children to go to the school. So if you assume that the members will continue to send about 450 kids, that means the number of non-member schools is down to 175. So by default, we are going to have to no longer admit 125 non-member children to get from 750 to 625. So this is a tough moment for Waltham and Watertown, because in my view, the deal to go to 625 children was the best and most responsible decision for the Arlington taxpayer, who as a finance committee member is our responsibility. My responsibility is not the taxpayer or the children of Watertown or Waltham. So now they have to make a decision. They can either gamble that they can get kids into that school when they need to, or they can join as members. And Frank, that is, in a lot of ways, I think that is a cold and calculated numbers decision, but so what, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we have to watch out for the children and the taxpayers of Arlington, and that's what we did.
The question of, in financing the rebuild, the question of what responsibility, if any, could be asked of non-member communities that are sending students to the school. Is that touched on in the changes to the agreement?
The state touches on it more than. We're working on a capital assessment for non-member communities. So one of the things that frustrates member communities, that non-member communities actually for a long period of time paid a lower rate. So the member tuition rate was higher than the non-member tuition rate, and the old administration of Minuteman felt there was just no problem with that, and that was a good idea. The new administration has been working very steadily to increase the tuition of non-member communities so it's equal to that of member communities. And I think we're at the point now where they're equal. Moving forward, under the new school, when we do come up with a funding plan, we're going to have the tuition rate and a capital assessment. And so this is a little more difficult of a task because there's some hurdles in terms of state law that need to be overcome. But again, the administration of Minuteman, which have been just great partners through this process, are working on clearing that hurdle legislatively. So if you're a non-member community, you will not only pay a member tuition that's equal to the member towns, but you will also pay a capital assessment that is equivalent to the member towns.
We will move on now to other related topics, starting with the fact that the budget was for fiscal year 2017, right? Was submitted by Town Manager's Office on the 15th of January, as is customary, I believe. And what are the next steps now? Who was that submitted to? What's going to be happening from here?
Well, so the budget goes from the town manager to the finance committee. And although I believe our town manager is pretty good about submitting a balanced budget, that budget now has to be compared to, and balanced means that the expenses will match the revenues. That budget now has to be compared to those revenues, and those revenue estimates will continue to change over the course of the fall because 15% of our revenue comes from the state. And until we actually get a final definition on our state aid, we may continue to have to adjust expenses in the budget to match those numbers. It goes to the Finance Committee, which will go through those budgets in detail, particular Finance Committee members meeting with particular departments, and the final adjusted budget that will be in balance will be presented to town meeting. So Dean, who's on the Finance Committee, I think he talked to you a little bit more about the specific mechanics that we go from here, but this is the first big step in getting to that end point where we have a budget that town meeting can pass.
When the budgetary numbers are going in at this point and the budget is submitted, do those people who are coming up with those numbers, do they have any sense of what that state aid is likely to be? Are you getting, is there a way of trying to anticipate that, or is it just you wait and you find out at a given moment and then you're...
For a long time now, we have issued a 5-year financial forecast, which estimates revenues and expenses over a long period of time.
The long-range planning.
The long-range planning. And what happens, and I think this is what frustrates people, is we estimate what we think all of that is going to be, and we present it to the taxpayers. And then we say, well, look, this is when we think we're going to run out of money and need an override. And there was one point in time we said it's going to be 2018. Then we said it's going to be 2019. And now we're saying it's going to be 2020. So when it comes to those numbers like state aid, local receipts, or anything like that, we budget and forecast on the conservative end. In my 10 years in the Finance Committee, there's never been a time where the actual number from the governor or the legislature has come in less than our forecast. So we always forecast on the low end. Whatever we get, we take as an added bonus. So this year, there's an interesting number in there where in the town manager's proposal, he said, any Chapter 70 money that comes in above the expectation of $125,000 from the state will go to the schools to help bolster their budget.
What is Chapter 70 money?
State, local school aid.
Local school aid, thank you.
So if you look at, if you go back and you look at our cherry sheet, which is the money we get from the state each year, we haven't gotten less than $175,000 for 5 years, right? So when he put $125,000 as the expectation for the cherry sheet, he built in a contingency factor in the event something went wrong, in the event there was a recession, in the event there was a problem, we're going to get 125. So when the state aid number comes out, if I had to guess, it will be more than his forecast, and the money will go to the schools. So there's a lot of conservative revenue budgeting in there. And I think that's very frustrating at times for the taxpayers because they feel that, the Finance Committee especially is saying, hey, we're going to run out of money here, or we have a problem in this year. And then all of a sudden the year extends. And it extends because we didn't have a recession and we didn't have cutbacks. But I can tell people, this is what I point to a lot, which is that method of budgeting was very helpful in 2009 when the wheels did fall off rapidly. Because had we been, everything is great, everything's rosy, let's reach for the skies, we would have had huge problems in 2009 that we avoided by conservatively budgeting revenue.
Well, messy, slow, and deliberative it may be, but it can lead to instances like last night.
Absolutely.
Which has us all celebrating. And we await Dean's jumping, who knows, that far in the air at some point. That's a pleasure we will await in a future installment of Your Arlington Dollar. We thank Annie LaCourt and Dean Carman for joining us again for another elucidating conversation, and we welcome you back to our next segment of Arlington Dollar at the appropriate time. For Your Arlington Dollar, I'm James Milan. Thanks for joining us. you.